And welcome on in to the latest edition of the Blue Horseshoe podcast. He is George Bremer. I am Ryan Hickey. We are back from vacation, and George, we are ready to get to training camp. How we're going to break this down is we're going to give you a massive training camp preview on this edition here, the Blue Horseshoe pod, and really kind of give you every single storyline we're watching and some predictions as well as we get set for Colts camp that gets set to report and kick off next week. Before we get there, George, I'll just say one thing really fast here. We basically took a 2-week vacation. You were on vacation for a week. I was on vacation for a week. I am shocked that we are sitting here 2 weeks later and we have not talked since or in that time. I thought for sure we're going to get one sort of breaking news story that warranted an emergency pod from the beach. I am truly, truly surprised that 2 weeks, for the most part, all was quiet on the home front.
Yeah, there were some things going on around the league that affected the Colts potentially, but fortunately, we really didn't have anything. No new contracts, no injuries. Thankfully, no arrests. Nothing. That's one thing I got to give this team. I'm jinxing everything right now, but the last few years, this group's been really good about that. They had a run there around 2012 to 15 or so, where there was about one arrest every offseason this time of year. And this year, and it's hard. I mean, you got 90 guys on the roster. Stuff happens. And a lot of it's just dumb stuff. Young kids with money stuff. Guys, public intoxication downtown, things like that. It's so easy to get in trouble this time of year. And, kudos to the Colts so far for not doing that the last several years, honestly.
That's true. That is true. And for our jobs and our livelihood, selfishly, George, thank you, Colts, for being on your best behavior in this 2 weeks for sure. All right, George, we're at 10 questions. Let's kick it off with the biggest one everyone obviously going to be talking about, paying attention to, and wondering: quarterback reps. As we go into training camp, how would you say, or how would you hope the quarterback reps, I should say, are split between Anthony Richardson and Gardner Minshew?
I think early on, at least, it's going to be the 50-50, model that they've used so far. I don't see them changing a ton from what we saw in the spring right away. Now, what's going to be intriguing to me is when that switches. What point do they make? It's one thing to make a call and say, we have a starting quarterback and this is who's going to start against the Jaguars in week one. But it's another thing to start subtly shifting that way. You know what I mean? Where you haven't made any announcement, but, Gardner Minshew's taking 60% of the snaps now, or 70% of the snaps now, or Anthony Richardson's taking 60% of the snaps now, or 70% of the snaps now. My gut feeling is maybe that starts to happen after the first preseason game, where you've kind of gotten out on the field a little bit, but maybe it takes all the way through the second one after you have the two practices leading up to that and the game. I don't know. That to me is going to be really interesting. I do think to start training camp, you're going to see something similar to that 50-50 split that they had all spring.
I hope Steichen goes into training camp with the mindset of it's Anthony Richardson's job to lose, meaning he'll get, let's just say, 60% of the starters reps, 65%. Like, if I was Steichen, what I would want to do is give Richardson the job. I'm going to say give him in quotes and let him earn it. And if he plays well, okay, it's yours, and let's go forward into week one with you being the starter. If he struggles, if it's obvious that, Gardner Minshew is more advanced and has a better grasp of the offense and is moving the ball better right now than Richardson, and there's still mistakes and there's still mental errors constantly, okay, fine. You gave him the opportunity. He didn't earn it. You take it back. You make Gardner Minshew the week one start, and you go on from there. If I was Steichen, I would want to see basically Richardson go out there, have the opportunity, have the reps to earn it, and see if he can keep the job rather than go 50-50, or even sometimes we've seen plenty of other coaches do this as well, especially with young quarterbacks, make them the backup. So give them 30, 40% of the starters reps and then try to have them earn it basically with the second team. If I was Steichen, would love to see him kind of earn it with the first team and go from there. Obviously, fingers crossed. I'm assuming most, if not all fans, at least should be rooting for, obviously, Anthony Richardson to be the starter. That is by far the best option for the Colts going forward. Gardner Minshew, great guy, great personality. Him starting, though, week one for the Colts does nothing, I think, for their future or really help Richardson go along. So give Richardson basically the job, let him earn it, and give him all the opportunity to show he is your starting quarterback week one. If you can't show it again, you got to pull the plug, but give him that opportunity. You were joking before, George, about, when will we kind of get the separation and when will we kind of know when and who the Colts starter will be. So their preseason schedule, their last game is a Thursday night game against the Eagles, August 24th. If I set the over-under date at August 25th, Shane Steichen will, on the record, declare his starting quarterback for week one. Would you take the under on August 25th or the over?
Probably take the over, because I just think Shane's going to be one of those guys that holds everything close to the vest. And so I think even if internally they've made a decision, and even if to the entire world watching practice there's a decision that's been made, I don't think they're going to announce it. I think it might be relatively clear before then who has won the job. I hope so, because I think that's the worst outcome for this competition is if you go through 3 preseason games and 3 joint practices and you still don't have any clear idea of who's in front. I think that's where I think Richardson wins that battle, but I think you'd much rather see him in particular put a stamp on it, win the job, make it clear to everyone that it's his. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because this is also, not only is there a quarterback competition that's a true quarterback competition for the first time in a long time. We were talking about that, before spring camp broke in the media room. It's hard to remember. Yes, you had Jacob Eason and Sam Ellinger a couple of years ago, but that was temporary. Carson Wentz was a starter. Everybody knew it. He was hurt. When was the last time they went into training camp legitimately with a competition to start week one? And it's got to be pre-Peyton Manning, probably pre-Jim Harbaugh. So you're talking maybe the early 90s, but maybe as far back as the 80s. That's, that to me is intriguing. But then on top of that, you've got a new head coach. So it's a test for him too. Like you said, the feeling so far is he's not going to be a guy that is really open, even to the extent that Frank Reich was. We'll see. It's been just a spring and a whole lot going on right now anyway. But now, with this quarterback job, is he going to be a guy that has, some coaches take that mentality of, I want to name the starter. I want the team to know it's him. I want to do this as fast as I can. I want to, start installing everything for him and rallying the team around him. And other guys take the mentality of, there's some advantage here. And I think that's the gut feeling right now that on the Colts, they already have a little bit of an advantage in that no one quite knows what Shane Steichen's offense is going to look like. Right. You can go back and look at the Philly tape. You can look at the old Indy personnel. You can try to guess how it's going to marry, but you don't really know until they get out there and play. So they've already got that advantage for week one. And my gut feeling is they're going to add to that, not announcing the quarterback, even if everybody kind of knows who it is. And that being said, you said earlier, you kind of hope they go in with the idea, that Richardson has a leg up. Even if the reps are 50-50, I do think that's the case. I get that sense just from everybody talking. Irsay said again, last week, that he wants Richardson to play and play early. Steichen has said that a few times. But even, just like when, Zaire Franklin was on Good Morning Football, or some of these other guys, when they're doing hits around the offseason, they all talk about Richardson as the likely starter. And that, to me, the gut feeling I get from that is that they want that to happen, that's the outcome that they're hoping for. So I do think it is his job to lose in some ways. But, again, and we've said this from the day he was drafted, they're going to make him earn it. It's not just going to be handed to him.
I think you're right, too. If you really look at it, it's going into training camp, barring an injury, it's pretty hard for Richardson right now not to be the week one starter. Because if you look at the scenarios that happen, both play well. Richardson plays well. Minshew plays well. I'm with you. I think Richardson would win that tie and does have the leg up. So I would say, okay, Richardson, your week one starter. If both are playing okay, again, I still think Richardson would have that leg up. Obviously, Richardson plays well. Minshew doesn't. It's not even a discussion. But the one thing I think that's interesting is you said the worst case scenario is if both quarterbacks struggle. I would agree. But also, if that is the case where Richardson is up and down and Minshew is not much better, I still think Richardson would have the leg up then, because if you are Minshew, you would assume the veteran quarterback, if the rookie's struggling, should at least bring some sort of consistency and some calmness to the offense and be able to make, let's say, the easy throws. And if he himself is struggling to move the ball, or he himself is struggling with mental errors, just like Richardson, I don't see how then putting Minshew out there is going to do this team any good. So you really think about it, the only way we see Gardner Minshew week one is if he lights up training camp and Richardson goes into the tank and basically regresses even from what we saw in a little bit of OTAs and minicamp. That is, again, I think it's tough to do. So I think if you are right now the Colts going forward here, you are unofficially or inadvertently or not, basically giving it every single chance Richardson to be the starter week one, which absolutely should be the case. And again, if he is not the week one starter, again, barring injury, that is really concerning, because that means that Richardson really was bad and almost gave the team no choice but to put Gardner Minshew out there week number one. All right.
Yeah.
That is. Sorry, George. Let me cut you off.
No, I was going to say, I think the only outcome, besides Minshew just outplaying him or Richardson getting hurt, would just be them not feeling like he has quite enough grasp on protections. That's the only other reason I could see it. And even that's concerning a little bit after, a full training camp. So, and with everything we know about him, I don't see that being the outcome. I mean, everything about this kid that we know so far, which isn't a lot because he's not been here very long, but everything we know about him so far, his football intelligence is off the charts. He's a very, very quick learner. And he knows what he sees on the field. You see that on tape in Florida. So I'm with you. I think the only way this happens is Minshew just flat out wins the competition. And if that happens, it would be concerning.
That it would. All right. That is question one. Question two. Will Shaq Leonard start training camp on the PUP physically unable to perform list? It's a prediction. We don't know right now much about it. So I'll say this, George. If he's on the PUP list, that is bad. Sound every alarm. What we got? 5-alarm fire. Hit all 5 alarms. That is really, really bad when you consider his second surgery he got was 8 months ago. If we're talking about the second surgery that was supposed to fix what happened with the first surgery and really make everything in his nerves and his back and his legs fire the way they're supposed to, and 8 months later, we're still talking about him on the mend or not fully being back, feeling comfortable, that is, considering basically we'd be at the same place we were last year, really, really concerning, George. And that I think would kind of really should put everyone's antennas up of, forget about just this year, but even going forward, can Shaq kind of get back to the form we saw in his early years?
Absolutely. I think it's mildly concerning that they didn't do anything in the spring. Only mildly because those sessions, you don't have pads on. They're, especially for a linebacker, you're not hitting anybody. You're not going to get a lot of work that's going to, if you've been around the league for a while, you're not going to get a lot of work that's going to give you a lot going into training camp. But there is at least some level of mild concern that he didn't take any snaps during the spring. If they get to, next week and they report and he's on PUP, yeah, I'm with you. I think that is, the highest DEFCON level. At that point, you do have to start worrying about if he's ever going to be the player he was before. Gut feeling is that he won't be on PUP, just because there seems to be a little more optimism coming from him and from the team. But it's really, even, we talk about the quarterback situation being unpredictable, and, this is far more unpredictable than that, because obviously we're not privy to his private medical records. We're not privy to what treatment he was or wasn't getting during the spring. Is it a situation where he could have gone in the spring and they just decided to give him the extra couple months, to get to the training camp? Or is it a situation where he wasn't ready yet? Those are things we don't know. Answers we're going to get next week that I think are right there. I mean, quarterback is 1A, and to me, Leonard is 1B as far as the most important questions surrounding this team.
I think another question as we go to question 3 here, George, is going to be the contract status of one Jonathan Taylor. We just are coming off the franchise tag deadline on Monday, where Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, Tony Pollard, especially the first two with Barkley and Jacobs there, top 5 in rushing yards, neither got a contract extension. So all 3 will play on the franchise tag in 2023. If you're on social media at any point on Monday, on Tuesday, you saw a lot of running backs, including Jonathan Taylor, voice their displeasure with how owners and teams treat the running back position and basically don't value it at all when it comes to second and third contracts. This is obviously a big looming question here for the Colts and Jonathan Taylor's future, George. By week 1, do you think we will have a Jonathan Taylor extension?
I don't. At this point, I don't. I was optimistic about that right up until probably that last day of spring camp when we talked to Taylor, and he said a lot of things that he's saying on Twitter right now then to us, that the running back position has been devalued, and I think he feels a little bit of responsibility to kind of bring in a number at a certain level, to help out the position overall. It's a tough spot, and we've talked about it throughout. Even when I was optimistic a deal would get done, before the season started, we were talking about how complicated this is going to be. And a lot of that is the true devaluing of that position across the league. And if you didn't believe it before, this week drove that home even more so. I remember people kind of didn't make fun of Nick Chubb, but there were a lot of questions about why would you take that deal when he signed in Cleveland. And it's the last really deal of that size that any running back has signed. So
yeah,
that's probably, I would think, where the Colts want Taylor to come in, somewhere around that range. And I'm sure he and his agent want to increase that number like happens at every other position in the game. Somebody told me the other day, and I have to look it up if it's true, it possibly could be, that kickers on average are paid more than running backs right now. And when you look at running backs all being on their rookie deals and then these second and third deals being really hard to get, I believe it's possible. How ridiculous is that? I understand devaluing the position. I understand Pacheco, a 7th round pick. He's the starting running back for the Super Bowl champions. The Eagles go to the Super Bowl and let their starter go and trade for somebody else. And teams have shown again and again that they can get guys late in the draft and they can make it work. But the fact that position is making less than kickers, to me, it swung a little too far in the opposite direction.
And look at Matt Gay. Right? The Colts were not shy by giving him the richest contract in kicker free agent history. That was the first move they made. And, like you said, now you have running backs that are just barely scratching for sort of anything, and teams are closing the door on them and not even thinking twice. I think a deal will get done here for 2 reasons. Number 1, before I'll just say this. I think every running back, I think on the whole, teams are right in not giving running backs big time money. But there's an exception right to every rule. I think Jonathan Taylor and the Colts specifically is one of those areas where I think an exception is needed here. Number 1, you have a rookie quarterback. Now you have Anthony Richardson. You need to give him weapons and talent to make his job, especially in year 1, easier when he is widely regarded as a project and is a guy who is raw and needs refinement. One of the ways to make his job easier, one of the ways to help ease his, development in the NFL is by having a guy in offense that defenses are game planning for, first and foremost. That is a guy of Jonathan Taylor's ilk, and that's what he kind of brings to make Richardson's life easier. That's number 1. Also, number 2, this is one thing I don't get, George. People freak out about running back contracts and say you can't pay a running back. I know there's not a lot of numbers in front of you here, but if I ask you, when was the last running back contract you can truly remember that hamstrung a team, I think you'd have a hard-pressed time in finding it, because the market's so suppressed right now that even a big contract in Ezekiel Elliott, right? You got a 60 or $90 million deal. A lot of that guaranteed money, a lot of the big money was up front in year 1, year 2, year 3, where these guys are still playing at a pretty high level. And when you see them start to fall off, like we just saw Zeke with this past year, the Cowboys cut him, and it's very little harm done on their salary cap. The Cowboys are not rebuilding going into this year or aren't able to make free agent moves because Zeke Elliott's still on their books and to cut him, and this massive gap of dead cap money is on their books and hamstringing their ability to add talent. It's very easy to move off a running back contract because for the most part, it's a year, 2 years, 3 years of, for the most part, guaranteed money. Then after that, it's very little where you can just cut a guy, almost no problem. That's what I don't understand is like, if you're the Colts and you give Jonathan Taylor, I don't know, a 4-year, let's just say $75 million deal, just pulling random numbers out of the air. You would assume, I don't know, 20 million, 25 million is let's just say guaranteed. I bet you almost all of that is going to be in the first year or two of the contract, which means if Jonathan Taylor in 3 years from now hits a wall, can't stay healthy, is not as productive, and you want to move off of him, it's pretty easy to do that, George. It is very easy to do that. That's the one thing that I don't understand is people look at that position and just scoff at, oh, you can't pay a running back. There are still talented running backs that I think bring value both in the pass game and the run game that you can pay. And then again, if things go south or don't go as you plan, you can move off of them and have it happen pretty simply. So I think when you consider that factor as well, I will say that a deal does get done. I think Taylor will be a Colt for, I can't even say the long time because even if he's under contract for, let's say, 5 years, do I think he'll see the entirety of the 5-year contract? I do not. But I think he'll be on the Colts for at least the immediate future and sign a long-term deal here before week 1 does kick off.
Yeah, I think the problem is the guaranteed money. You see the positions, every other position, it's going up. That's the thing. More and more guarantees are going in, and more guys are getting, longer and longer deals. Quarterbacks are basically at the point where it's almost fully guaranteed. I know Cousins does have full guarantees and Watson does have full guarantees, but even the deals that were signed this year, they're like, what, 70, 80% guaranteed? They're way
massive. Receivers now too, by the way, are kind of in that elk in terms of a lot of guarantees.
Yeah, receivers are getting big guarantees, and you're seeing it every other position. The percentage at least is going up of what they're getting guaranteed, and I think that's part of what's depressing the running back market because owners don't want to guarantee money to a guy, to a position that's really beat up, that's really hard to stay healthy at. Just look across the board. Very few running backs make it into their late 20s and early 30s and are still the player they were, when they entered the league. Adrian Peterson, Derrick Henry, that might be the list.
Right.
It doesn't go very
small handful.
And so I think that's where it's coming now. I think the running backs are saying they're looking around the league because like what you were just explaining happens all the time. It happened this year with Dalvin Cook. You sign a big deal, and then you're gone. They come to you. They want to renegotiate. They want you to take less money. You don't want to do it, and you're out on the open market. I think the running backs are trying to prevent that from happening. They're trying to make those 6-year, $90 million deals more real than they are, less just paper deals. And to me, it's a battle that I guess as somebody, working in the newspaper business where, you feel like you're always kind of undervalued, you do kind of sympathize with them. They have no leverage right now. And on top of that, you have a new CBA that makes it really painful to hold out. So not only do they not have a lot of negotiating leverage around the league, because whether you want to call it, collusion or not, it doesn't matter in this case. I don't think it is collusion. It's just an agreement by all analytical minds that this is not a position you pay a lot of money for. And on top of that, you can't really sit out games. You're just going to lose more money. Look at what Le'Veon Bell did. He tried to kind of take the hard line with the Steelers, and it didn't work out for him. Never really got that money back. Never really got back to the player he was before. And at the same time, I look at Jonathan Taylor's situation, and I think, of course, he wants guaranteed money. When he was a rookie, Marlon Mack tore his Achilles the first half of the first game of his contract year, and I think he's played like 14 games in the NFL since. So, yeah, of course you want the guaranteed money, and of course you want that chance, but I don't know, as much as I empathize with the running backs, I don't know where their leverage comes from right now.
And that's the problem. And that's why we're seeing not only any big deals, but we're seeing, like you said, more and more, all right, get rid of this guy, get a guy in the draft, and let's just pay him the rookie minimum, and we're still winning games. It's a lot goes into the run game. It's more than just the running back, which I think also is part of the reason why teams say, screw, we'll just get a 7th-round pick and we'll plug him in and get the same kind of production. It's really tough. It's really tough for running backs, but so maybe I'm a fool in saying this, George, and believing it, but I do think we will see JT get a deal before week number 1, although right now the tide is definitely not turning in that direction. That is for sure. All right, this team is interesting. We're talking before the pod today about all the positional battles going on in training camp. There's a lot to watch, and that's kind of one of the fun things about training camp with a young team. There's going to be a lot of open positions right now. If you were to say the biggest positional battle you are excited to see and play out, George, what position would that be?
I'm going to go with one I haven't talked about a lot, just because a lot of them we have talked about on here. I'm interested to see what happens at defensive end. And part of that is because we know Kwity Paye is going to start on one side or the other, but we don't even know for sure. Is he the wide 9 pass rush specialist? Is he going to be the big end spot he was last year? And then who starts next to him? And again, I think those are interchangeable questions here. If you put a Dangbo out there, he's been practicing at the wide 9. He was last year. He's not the first guy you would think of, though, to play that spot. Is he the wide 9 with Paye over on the other side? Do you flip those two? Do you put Samson Ebukam out there as the wide 9 defender? Does Tyquan Lewis end up as the other starter? And which side is he? I just think there's so many combinations there. It could really be an interesting one to watch.
I like that one a lot because you are right. We have not talked about defensive end a ton. They did definitely add to the position. There's a lot of talent there. I like that one. I'm going to go, I guess, in a similar vein then. I'm going to go tight end because that was another position they added a ton of young talent, unproven talent to. There's a lot of bodies there. I think now you're starting to see, especially with kind of the NFL and how salaries are skyrocketing, you have a good tight end. That's still like the biggest mismatch you could have on the field. We saw Jelani Woods, especially kind of late come on. Drew Ogletree is back after having a solid first half of training camp, then unfortunately getting hurt. So that's more talent there. Kamoa Ali Cox, hang on to the starting job and still be more of a threat in the pass game. They bring in Farrell Brown. They draft Will Mallory. Like, there is just a lot of bodies there that I'm really excited to see how it does turn out, because in part, when you have a rookie quarterback with Anthony Richardson, I think that's going to be a position, tight end, that's going to be very important for him and its success. And if you can get constant mismatches and provide, just because these guys are so massive, big targets for a quarterback that at times struggles with accuracy and consistency, that I think could be, Richardson's one of his best friends this season is having a big target to throw the ball to consistently, especially on third down. So that's one that I'm really excited to see how it does shake out, because I think there is kind of like quarterback. I think there's talent there. I think it's unproven talent. Can we see Jelani Woods take a step here in year 2 and be more consistent? And can we see Ogletree get in the field and kind of be, a nice threat as well? I'm excited to see how that does shake out here. And, how we're talking about the Colts tight end position, let's say 6 weeks from now, as you do get set for the season. How about receiver, George? Is there any sort of competition you're looking for? Because I think for me, Josh Downs versus Isaiah McKenzie for that slot one could be one that's really intriguing to watch. I think if you're definitely a Colts fan, at least I'll say for myself, I'm biased. I'm rooting for Downs to win that job, and I'm really excited to see his chemistry do develop here with Richardson.
Yeah, I think that's a huge one. I think it's one of the biggest things on offense outside of obviously quarterback, because that slot receiver is such an important role both across the league and in what we saw of Steichen's offense in Philadelphia. So, whoever wins that, I think is going to be a really important part of this football team. I think McKenzie probably, if he has a security blanket in it, it's that coming in, I would think he's a favorite to be the punt returner. Nyheim Hines isn't here anymore. Dallas Flowers is more the kickoff guy. I would think that he's the favorite to be the punt return guy. So I think he's going to have a spot on the roster no matter what, even if he's the 4th receiver, which is still a big role in today's NFL too. It's not like the 4th receiver never sees the field, like the 80s, where the 4th receiver was just somebody who kind of held a clipboard basically, but not now. But I think that one's huge. I really do, because you're looking at the number of snaps. It's another security blanket type of position that for a young quarterback, where you get some relatively easy throws over the middle if you design the plays right. And, Both those guys, I think, have an ability to turn small gains into big plays, which is also huge for a rookie quarterback. So that one I think is gonna be a lot of fun. And then the sixth receiver spot, they've kept six in most recent years. And looking at the way things break down right now, that's the only other, like, who is the third receiver is a question. But the top five are pretty much locked in. We can figure out who's 3 and 4. Ashton Doolin's 5, and he's going to be a special teams ace again. And he has a chance, I think, too, to work his way up the depth chart if he really shines. But those 5 are, barring injury, they're going to make the roster. After that, is it Brashad Perriman? Is it Mike Strawn? Or is it somebody, one of these, undrafted guys that are here in camp that steps up and makes a name for himself? I think that's the other kind of question mark at wide receiver.
One position we didn't bring up that I'm glad we didn't, just segues into our 5th question perfectly. Defensive back. Arguably, George, the most, especially at corner, wide open of any competition we will see in training camp. There's a lot of young, unproven guys in that room, which does make it more exciting. You have to pick right now, prognosticate which cornerback do you think will emerge and be a sure thing in terms of a starter during training camp? Which guy do you kind of forecast and see kind of taking over that role?
Yeah, I'm going to cheat and say Kenny Moore, right? Because but after that, I mean, the two outside are completely wide open. And the funny thing is, the guy I probably have the most confidence in, we haven't seen at all, and that's Juju Brents. When you look at his college tape, his size, his athleticism, all of it fits Gus Bradley perfectly. I mean, I think they were really excited. It's not just a hometown kid they brought in here. They're really excited to get a guy that really fits this scheme. And so even though we haven't seen him yet, such is the nature of that position that I think it's his job to lose. I think of all the rookies, he's the one that's most likely to start week 1 right now, because I don't know who else does if it's not Brents. And then the other spot right now, I kind of lean towards Dallas Flowers, just from what happened in the spring, but that's incomplete beyond the fact that we saw like 1/3 of the practices. There's also Darius Rush was hurt a bunch of that time. He really wasn't out there on the field. So we don't know how much, if he's healthy, is he ahead of Flowers? We don't know that yet. And I think Jalen Jones, who's a 7th round rookie, really is going to work his way into this conversation as well. And also, I believe it's Daryl Baker. There's so many new names out there that if I'm butchering that one, I apologize. But he's a guy that's been around a little bit, hasn't caught on anywhere, like just a year or two. But he had a pretty good spring too. And that's what's so intriguing about that spot in particular, is it could be somebody we're not even talking about right now. It's that open of a position.
Daryl Miguel Baker Jr. You're all over it, George. Nothing gets by you. Look, I think Brents is absolutely a great prognostication. Like I said, it's tough. We haven't seen him, but everything you read about draft coverage, watch him at K-State, it signals he absolutely should be a week 1 starter, and be a little concerning, kind of like if Richardson's not the week 1 starter, if Brent's, not because injury, is not the week 1 starter, I would agree. It's definitely concerning there for the Colts. I'll go Darius Rush in terms of emerging and kind of bursting onto the scene as one of the 2 starters here. Good length guy, can make some plays here. I think they got good value, which I know doesn't exactly translate in terms of when you draft a guy and how they'll produce on the field, but this guy with a lot of talent, so it's not exactly like a traditional 5th round pick per se. And so I'll go with Darius Rush, kind of burst on the scene. Still a raw guy, but again, for this season, that doesn't really mean much because a lot of guys are learning on the job, and that's sometimes the best way to go. So it's going to be, I think, a lot of young guys. Brents, Rush, 2 rookies right now coming in, potentially being 2 outside corners. It's going to be a very interesting battle, one that I think clearly will have a lot of growing pains and see probably more downs than ups during training camp, but that's by far, I think, the most wide open position we'll see in Colts training camp, and should definitely be a fun one to watch for sure. So we're halfway through here on our 10 questions heading into training camp. How will the quarterback reps be divided up? Will Shaq Leonard start on PUP? George and I both say no. Not exactly a ton of confidence there. I'm a little more hopeful than not, but we both do think that when practice starts, we'll see Shaq Leonard in a 53 jersey on the field. Will Jonathan Taylor, question number 3, get paid? I say yes. George does say no. Biggest positional battle. George goes defensive end. I go tight end. And which defensive back will emerge? George goes Juju Brents. I will say Darius Rush. All right, George. New quarterback, also new head coach, which means a new way of doing things. I know you got a sneak peek during, OTAs and minicamp of how practices could look and how Shane Steichen wants to run a team. What is the biggest difference you think we will see with the Colts and how they conduct practice and how they kind of get ready for the season compared to Frank Reich in the past?
The thing that stuck out to me from the spring is just constant competition. I mean, just about everything they do, there's some kind of competitive element to it. Not that Reich didn't, they had races and things at the end of some practices, and they did some different little drills to try to add that little competitive flavor, but it just feels like it seeps into everything Steichen does. And there were even times where there were coaches putting a hand in, like when the quarterbacks are warming up literally before practice, everybody else is stretching and they're just throwing to trainers and things. And there's coaches just kind of walking through half jokingly, knocking the ball down, just little things like that. They're going on, putting guys with pads out there in 7-on-7 to give a look, to the quarterback of a defensive line, even though you're not rushing him, necessarily, there's at least some element there of a defensive line. Just little things like that I think go through every drill where I think he didn't work with Pete Carroll, but it feels like that kind of, mentality. Carroll's always in Seattle, compete every day. And I think that's really what drove that program. And I feel like that's what Steichen's striving for here. So it'll be interesting to see on a day-to-day basis at training camp how that comes through.
I'm going to go with physicality. I think you can kind of see that in the sense of having 2 joint practices instead of just, the traditional one. And I think that's really necessary, especially when you kind of look at, especially last year, George, the offensive line. Like, that's really, right, the offensive line, I think, is the position that suffers the most in terms of the new training camp rules. There's no really 2-a-days, and there's not a lot of hitting and the limit to how many full padded practices you can do. That is the one area I think we have seen where the offensive line really does get hurt the most by it. And you look, it takes probably into October for an offensive line to truly mesh and gel and to be one cohesive unit. And so I get it. It's, you're not doing a ton more of hitting, but at least it does kind of give you a little bit more than just a traditional practice or a walkthrough here when you are going against other guys, and you can kind of up the intensity, up, like you were talking about, the competition level, and just have it be as game-like as possible. I think having now 2 joint practices will kind of help with the Bears and the Eagles, kind of help get a little extra work and hopefully refine that offensive line a little more than what happened last year. And I just don't think that's an accident in terms of, being able to kind of get as many live reps. And to your point, kind of bleeds into this as well, get as much competition for the guys as you can in training camp to simulate as much as possible real game experiences. That's what I will go with here. Hopefully see a little bit more physicality, especially again on the offensive defensive lines, where that is the unit or the 2 units I think need it the most and suffer the most when it comes to now how training camp is run differently than in years past.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that.
All right, so let's go then into the biggest concern, George. We are sitting here right now recording on July 18th, basically just about a week or so away from training camp starts. As we head into training camp, right now, your biggest concern is?
Probably pass protection, just because we don't know where that stands. I mean, you've got a left tackle who's being handed the job in his second year. Finished the year well last year, but you got to see if he can continue that and build on it. Because I think that's one of the big things too. When we say he finished last year well, he didn't finish last year at a level where you're like, okay, he's a starting left tackle in this league and there's no problems. He's still got to improve and build from there. And I believe he will. He's got that mentality. We saw it happen during really tough circumstances for him as a rookie. To grow last year the way he did was not an easy thing to do. And I think you're going to see that continue, but it's speculation at this point. You're not, going back on resume. And then obviously the big three of Ryan Kelly and Quentin Nelson and Braden Smith need to get back on track. If they play the way they did last year, then Anthony Richardson's development is going to be set back. There's no two ways around that. I think when I was doing their position by position breakdown, I think the trio of them were charged with 17 sacks combined by Pro Football Focus. You just can't. That can't happen.
No.
Half of that can't happen. So that's my number one concern, just because I don't feel like behind them, again, there's not much experience. I mean, you've got the starting lineup is what it is. You're going to have the competition at right guard. Will Fries is the front runner there, and we'll see if anybody else steps up, whether it's Danny Pinner coming back to get that job or whether it's Emil Ekior, another Indianapolis guy stepping in there, or whether Will Fries holds it down. But to me, it almost doesn't matter who the right guard is. Those other four guys, if they live up to their potential, if Ryman continues the trajectory he's on, becomes a solid left tackle, and the other three return to their Pro Bowl levels, it really doesn't matter who's at right guard. As long as that guy if Will Fries plays exactly like he did last year and the other four guys are at their level, Will Fries will be fine in that role. So, but to me, that's the most critical thing that we're not talking a ton about, because the whole offense, Shane Steichen's trying to lay a foundation for what his offense is going to be here. You're hoping you got a rookie quarterback back there who's developing. And if the offensive line plays like it did a year ago, all that is out the window.
100% right. Like we talked about it. That's in previous pods. That could be the biggest roadblock and or hindrance to Anthony Richardson's development in year one, is if he develops bad habits because the offensive line sucks. They can't block for him and just get him killed back there. And so to piggyback off that, like a major concern is just a lack of competition. Like I do have faith, and I do believe like the starting five can be better and will be better going into this year than they were last year. With that said, I don't like the fact that Ballard is basically for the second year in a row going all in on the starters and saying it's Ryman or bust. Basically, Will Fries or bust. Like, I just don't like the fact that there's not real competition at those positions to just bare minimum make them earn it. Like, not saying that you're going to bring some guy, like you're bringing someone in that's better than Ryman, but if you can just bring someone in that can push him and make him earn the job, be better, get that, again, competition flowing early on, where it's not just handed to him and here's a starting job. I think that would have benefited the offensive line a lot better than basically right now saying, hey, here's our starting five. Let's hopefully you play better. I don't like the hope thought process playing out here. But also, let me ask you this. Tell me if I'm overblowing this situation. I am a little concerned with the health of the team, not going into training camp per se, but we saw a lot in the off-season training workouts. Richardson, even though he was it didn't matter if he was first team or second team, he was not throwing to really anyone that he should be thrown to in the regular season. Pittman was out all of off-season workouts, right? I don't believe he practiced one time, George, in OTAs or minicamp.
Maybe really early. Really.
Basically was MIA. Alec Pierce missed a majority of the offseason workouts. Josh Downs is out outside of rookie minicamp with an injury. And so, obviously, I know running backs are different. Jonathan Taylor didn't practice. Jelani Woods didn't practice. Drew Ogletree didn't practice. Like, I am a little concerned that a lot of the weapons Richardson will be throwing to come the season did not get any work with them in the offseason. I know Richardson was there, and he was getting reps, but it is different when you're throwing to guys like Malik Turner, no disrespect to Malik Turner, versus when you're throwing to guys like Michael Pittman Jr. I know they're talking about working out in Florida, in that break between minicamp and training camp, so I'm sure that helped a little bit. But if you really think about it, there's been no continuity built whatsoever between the starters at receiver and tight end and running back and your probable starting quarterback in Anthony Richardson. That to me is a little concerning going into training camp, that he's sort of going in blind when it comes to guys he'll be throwing to in training camp and when the season starts.
It's never ideal when there's many guys on the sideline as there were, and the defense was kind of in the same boat. I mean, Shaq was obviously out, Brents was out, Rush was out most of that time. You're just not getting that feel together. I don't think it's a huge deal as long as
Okay.
everybody's ready to go day one of training camp and as long as you're getting those snaps right away. But this bleeds into the first week of training camp. You do start to wonder, okay, how much time is there to really get these guys on the same page? I think that's one of the things when you go back to 2021, that's one of the things they talked about. They thought led to the slow start that year
Yeah.
was that they really didn't, by their own choice, they really didn't have much of a spring. They were done before Memorial Day that year, and what they did do was I don't think they did any 11-on-11 work the entire time. I think it was all 7-on-7, and they felt like that was something that led into them getting off to a really slow start in a year that you missed the playoffs by one game. So that couldn't it be really important? Sure, it can. But I think the other thing about that 2021 year is you got into training camp, and that was the year that was a new injury every day. And they were missing Quentin Nelson for a long part of that. They were missing Ryan Kelly. They were missing their starting quarterback for most of training camp. T.Y. Hilton got hurt right at the end of that training camp. So, obviously, guys stay healthy when they get there. But I think that's if those guys are all ready to go on day one and they're all able to work together as an offense from day one, I think that's critical. If not, I think it becomes another one of these, many question marks around this team.
Absolutely. And it's just like, I think it's just maybe a storyline that's not talked about a lot because I get it, right? Mini camp, OTs, it's not a big deal. And Richardson was there. So it's not like he's just at home, like chilling, not getting any reps. He was getting the reps and was working with the coaches. Like I said, we see, how many hours it does take to get on the same page. And for Richardson, with his learning curve being steep, you do want him kind of feeling comfortable, at least throwing to certain guys and knowing where they'll be and kind of pick up their tendencies. They pick up his. It's a whole new world. And it is a little concerning going to training camp that they're basically blind on that aspect and have no sort of rapport whatsoever outside of, again, rookie mini camp and a parking lot, hotel parking lot throwing session between Richardson and Downs. Otherwise, it's been a lot of practice squad players, a lot of extra bodies that probably won't make at least a 53-man roster that he was kind of thrown to for most of the offseason. All right, we got 3 questions left here, George. We talked about, biggest concern. We talked about the biggest positional battle you're watching. When it comes to, this could be a player or a position that has to step up the most, that has the most to prove, and really has to have a strong training camp to feel good going to the season. Again, position or player, George, what would you kind of tab that one to be in terms of needing to have a really good training camp here?
I mean, we just went through the offensive line, so that's my answer, but I'm not going to go back down that road again. I'm going to go with Julian Blackmon for the simple reason that we are talking about how young that secondary is, and it's incredibly young. He and Kenny Moore are really the only 2 guys who are likely going to start who have a lot of reps under their belt, who are truly veterans in this league. And Kenny's personality just isn't really a major leader role. He's a leader, but he's a leader by example. He's a guy that goes out and he's not going to tell you how to do something, he's going to show you how to do something. You watch him and you kind of follow his example. I think Blackman's the one guy in that secondary who can stand up, be that voice, be that vocal leader. And I think also won't be afraid to hold guys accountable, which with the young guys is going to be incredibly important. When they make a mistake, you can't just pat them on the back and say, hey, go get them next time. There needs to be support there because it's going to happen. You're going to struggle as a rookie, but I think he's going to be that guy who's going to point out to them, hey, this happened because A, B, C, and I think that voice is without Rodney McLeod, without Stephon Gilmore, they need somebody to step in that secondary and be that vocal locker room leader. And to me, Blackmon, we don't know what the rookies are going to do because they haven't been here. And it's hard for a rookie to step into that role. Of the returning players, Blackmon almost has to be that guy.
I'm actually my answer is going to be for a lot of the same reasons your answer just was. I'm going to go Quentin Nelson. Because I think if you look at the offense, right, there's no right now one leader on the offense. I think that guy is your left guard and Quentin Nelson. I know he made the Pro Bowl last year, but let's be honest, it was nowhere near a traditional Quentin Nelson sort of year. And with the offensive line being so important to not only the Colts' success, but I think Anthony Richardson's success in year number 1 and helping him get off on the right foot, then that starts and the tone gets set with your left guard, with arguably the best player on the offense, if not definitely on the offensive line. And I think his play will help get, Bernard Ryman along here and going on year number 2 and kind of pick up where he left off. Ryan Kelly had a down year last year in 2022. I think, again, Quentin Nelson's play can help set the tone. And for nothing else, kind of like I said, hold guys accountable of this is a standard. We've seen this offensive line and this group, for the most part, have a lot of success. Let's get back to that. I think it starts with right now the highest paid player, right? I believe it is, yeah, on the offense, bare minimum. And the guy that really, for a offense that right now has a rookie quarterback, so he can't really be a vocal leader. Every other position is pretty soft-spoken in terms of no one getting in each other's face or being that vocal guy. I think the offensive identity and setting the tone is going to start with Big 56. I think he does need to have a big bounce back year. I think he will, but especially, again, coming off of a down year, not just for him, but for the entire offensive line, I think the Colts really need to kind of start with him and just setting the tone really strong here and kind of letting the message be known that we will not be anywhere near as bad as we were last year. And then kind of, they say high tide rises or raises all boats. I think Ryman's play will improve. I think Ryan Kelly's play will improve. That could help Will Fries' growth as well. Whoever's at right guard, excuse me. I think it all kind of starts there with Quinn Nelson at left guard.
Absolutely. I think he absolutely has to be there. I think he and Kelly are the most critical pieces to getting that offensive line back on track. Braden Smith obviously has some work to do too, and he slipped last year as well, but it didn't feel like his tumble was as far as theirs. And so, you can get those two back in the middle. And as we talked about before, that's the engine for this whole thing. If the offensive line is not right, then I don't see this offense being right.
I would agree. I would definitely agree with that. All right, 2 more questions here, George. We've talked, and every question's been specific, right? About a player, about a position. Let's just take a 10,000-foot view here. Going into training camp for the Colts here in 2023, biggest overall storyline you're looking at. I'm going to go first here. I'm going to say blankets rookie development. Because you look at this class, right? The Colts drafted 12 guys in the draft. And I would argue this class going forward with a new quarterback and a new head coach, it's going to set the tone for the next 5 years, right? We talked about the head coach and quarterback combo this offseason, getting it right, because that will, help determine how good or bad the Colts will be in the next 5 years. I think you can even now include the entire rookie draft class where you look at, they got guys that, if they do pan out, would be keys at quarterback, in your secondary, key guys in the trenches as well on the offensive, defensive lines. Like, I think this is a big class here where if you can get even 7 out of 12 being just contributors, either a starter or an important guy coming off the bench here as a key backup, I think that could really help set the tone for the Colts here going forward and get momentum built in the right way. So because of the sheer large volume of the draft class, plus, again, the important positions that you're going to rely on these guys for, you're going to have probably a starting quarterback, most likely 2 guys in the secondary on the outside starting as rookies. We'll see about the offensive line. We'll see, at receiver, if Downs can win a position and be a starter as well. Like, there are some key areas where if the rookies do pan out, kind of like in 2018, where you got Shaq Leonard, we're able to kind of, that was right there, Quentin Nelson draft as well, I believe, off the top of my head. I don't know why I'm blanking on that. Like, you were able to kind of get some pillars and foundational pieces in that draft class. If you can do that again here in 2023, I think that's going to really set the Colts up here going forward strong. So in terms of overall storyline to watch, George, I'll go just the rookie development here and how they do progress in the first training camp.
Yeah, I mean, you go back to 2012, and that was a big part of that fairy tale season. The rookies coming along quickly, guys like Dwayne Allen and T.Y. Hilton, and obviously Andrew Luck, making big splashes and carrying that on through having a pretty good career. Kobe Fleener, there was a lot of guys from that draft that had good rookie years and then played multiple seasons here and were big parts of, some playoff runs here for this franchise. I'm going to go with a really, really low bar because last year kind of set me in those expectations. I just want to see some quiet competency. And what I mean by that is last year got to be so chaotic. Don't make headlines every week for the wrong reasons. Don't have the starting lineup changing for reasons other than injury almost every week, revolving doors at multiple positions. To me, that's what they need to get back on track. If these guys, and it goes hand in hand with what you just said, if the rookies are going to develop and you're going to start setting a foundation for the future, then you got to get out of that where they were a year ago, where it's just every week is a new drama And, you've just got chaos flying around the locker room, around the building. That to me, if they can get through this year, no matter what the record is, if they can get through this year without weekly headlines of, coaching staff changes and new starters and all the things that were going on a year ago, then I think that's a step forward for this franchise.
It would be nice, George, to be like halfway through training camp. Not that there's nothing to talk about, but not have constant drama taking over the pod. Again, not as boring. We hope not to make this podcast boring, but like I said, it's quiet. There's not a lot of attention being paid on the Colts. They can kind of go about their business almost in the shadows, if you will, especially again, when you're trying to develop and break in a rookie quarterback, that having the drama, having the questions, having guys leave because of injury. Now, the good thing is, didn't seem like COVID will be a big impact like it was for this team the last few years. So that should be good in terms of who's in, who's out. So going in, again, on the surface, which, as we know, George, nothing ever goes to plan, but at least going in on the surface, it seems that should be at least attainable, possible. Hopefully it does come to fruition, but at least right now, maybe outside of Shaq's health and that kind of being a constant question there, and obviously Richardson's development, which will obviously be a storyline as well. There's not a lot of big time overarching questions that could serve as a distraction to this team and maybe bring them down before they do get going. Let's finish off on a positive note here, George, because every year there's always a player that the fans clamor to that kind of steals the hearts of those, and everyone roots for them to have success. The old training camp darling. You have a darling here, George? You think that, a player that maybe doesn't even make the roster, but people will be talking about that we really don't know too much about right now, but by the time, late August comes, it's one of those guys where everyone's on the couch rooting for this guy to make the team, or even better, planning on him being a legitimate contributor to this 2023 team.
Yeah, I think that's always interesting every year because you try to pick those guys, but they're so organic in the way that they develop because somebody starts stacking practices together, and the buzz starts coming out of training camp, and then they go into that first preseason game and they have a big day. I felt like Jelani Woods was kind of that guy last year, especially after Ogletree got hurt. He had that slow start, and everybody's kind of like, hey, the 6th round tight end kind of looks better than him, and then he just kept building and building and building, and they get into Buffalo and he scores a touchdown, and it just took off for him, the rest of the summer, and it became a really good story, and he ended up having a pretty good rookie year. Especially would have been better if he'd been able to stay healthy. I'm sure that's his number one regret. So I think, I'm going to throw a name out there, but I think the point is it's probably going to be someone we're not thinking about right now, the kind of steps forward. But the first one that comes to mind for me is Evan Hall, because he's at that running back position. He's a guy who can catch the ball out of the backfield. He's got some good athleticism, but he's not by any stretch of imagination a top guy. But there were times, if you go back and watch Northwestern, and they're not in a great situation right now. But if you go back and watch them a year ago, there were times that he was about the only good thing on the field, that was happening for them. And so I could see him being a guy the fans get behind. I could see him being a guy who puts up some good numbers in some of these preseason games. Probably the ceiling for him is third running back. So it's not like there's a huge role waiting for him, but he just seems like a really personable kid. One of those guys that walked in, was a professional from day one as far as talking with the media and the way he deals with things. And I think if he puts the numbers up he's capable of, he could be somebody the fans get behind pretty quickly.
I'm going to go. I like that. Because also it's easy to see him make a nice run or make a nice catch, and you can see that on social media and be excited. So this one is going to be tough, maybe in terms of getting the fan support. I'm going to go Emil Ekiyor. I'm going to go really out. Yeah, your face says it all. Really outside the box here. I get it. Right guard is not sexy, but it's a position that's open. It's a guy who, by all accounts, is very talented, and the Colts should have been, nowhere near where they're able to get him in terms of being an undrafted guy. But this is a guy who has a lot of starts at Alabama, very talented, a lot of experience, and for a position that is open, could be a guy that I think, especially if and we'll have 2 joint practices here, maybe that's the best chance for him to kind of make a mark and maybe pancake a guy or 2. But I'm going to say that the buzz for him grows, that he does well in the games he plays, And maybe we'll make, he's not going to be Quentin Nelson 2.0 making a highlight reel for a guard. I don't think we'll see that for a while. But steady improvement to the point where I think we'll be talking about him week 1, and fans will be rallying around him as believing he could be a legitimate piece here for this offensive line and building it to be better and, like I say, give Richardson protection. It's tough because usually like Mike Strawn or Jelani Woods, like you mentioned, like 2 skill guys can make plays, can be like, oh, wow, look at that catch, or look at that, catch and run. It's easier to do for skill guys or defensive back. Wow, what an interception, lockdown guy. I get right guard is probably the one no one will be looking at, or really caring about the most, but I'll go Emil Ekiyor. Talent, undrafted, maybe not a guy a lot of people are expecting to even, compete for the job. But I think has a real chance to win the job. I think we'll kind of see his meteoric rise, George, go out through training camp. That's where I'm going to need you here. I know you are the Grover Stewart stand here for the defense. I'm going to need you to be my Emil Ekiyor stand here, especially in person, watching him block. Maybe we can get a few highlights of pancake blocks here. Maybe him hitting the sled like really hard. Like we'll take anything to jack up his stock.
He's a hometown kid too, so that's going to help. I think that makes him a decent pick. I mean, he's a guy who went to Indianapolis Cathedral. I think he's a guy that a lot of fans are going to want to rally around, and especially if the offensive line is struggling. I think you're going to hear calls for him, and hey, why not? Let's see what Ekiyor can do. So, yeah, I think this is a good choice. I think all the defensive backs have a chance to be this guy because they've got a lot of opportunity ahead of them, and so I think. And it feels like every year there's a receiver, doesn't it? Like every year there's some receiver who wasn't on anybody's radar, who comes in that first preseason game, gets a big play or whatever, and it just becomes, the talk of the preseason. So that's the fun stuff. That's the fun stuff at this time of year. These guys that come out of nowhere and make a push to make the roster or the starting lineup.
You know what name is screaming right now in terms of receiver making plays in that first preseason game? Malik Turner. Mm-hmm. Right, he made a few plays. He's got a lot of reps with Richardson already, so it's not like he's going to be coming in there, rusty to say the least. He's already in midseason form right now. I could see him going, nice little 3 catches, 75 yards, maybe a little touchdown here and there, turning people's heads about the 6th receiver position. There you go. But going back to Ekiyor, really quick,
on the receiving end of the first deep ball from Richardson. That's
true. Their stock is going to shoot right up. That is for sure. But going back to Ekiyor really fast here, George, it's also a name very easily chantable, which I think is important. Ekiyor. Sometimes you got to have that catch, it's something catchy to kind of get going here. That's easy to scream if you're out there watching practice to just get it going.
Oh, there's no doubt. And like I said, if that line struggles, I can definitely see him being a guy that gets some momentum. Hopefully that doesn't happen because the line struggles, everybody's going to struggle. And I think they need to avoid that at all costs. But I don't, Will Fries has the job right now. I definitely don't feel like he's a lock to start 17 games this year.
I like Will too. Penn State guy, grew up in the same hometown as my cousin. So I got a lot of ties to actually Will Fries. So
tough kid too, really tough, hard-nosed guy. I mean, I talk about what Ryman went through last year. Will Fries was becoming a starter for the first time last year in all this chaos, and it was able to, hold that down. That's no little feat.
No, you're right about that. And he faced some tough competition last year on the defensive line in the interior. That is for sure. So that is our training camp preview. 10 questions we have going into training camp. How will the quarterback reps split up? We both think Richardson does have the edge over Gardner Minshew, and both would be surprised, George and I, if Richardson week 1 is not the starter for the Colts. Question number 2, will Shaq Leonard start on PUP? We both, George and I, say no. He will be on the practice field. Will Jonathan Taylor get an extension and be one of the rare running backs to actually get paid? I say yes. George does say no. Biggest positional battle we are watching throughout training camp. George goes defensive line. I go tight end. Which defensive back will emerge and become a big-time starter? George goes Juju Brents. I will say Darius Rush. Biggest thing we are looking for from a Shane Steichen-led team in his first training camp. George goes, what was it, George? Quiet competence?
No, for competition for that one.
That's okay. My apologies. My apologies. Competition for the difference here. I will go physicality. Biggest concern is George said the lack of competition, basically the offensive line in general, which is absolutely fair. I'll go lack of reps and lack of continuity for Richardson and the skill guys with everyone kind of being out. Player position that needs to step up the most during training camp. George goes, oh, I'm blanking, George. I'm sorry here.
Julian Blackmon.
Julian Blackmon. Holy cow. I'm sorry. It's still in vacation mode. Still in vacation mode. And for a hot second, I forgot my answer, but I go Quentin Nelson there. In terms of players that need to stand up, Julian Blackmon again for George. Biggest training camp storyline. This was it, George. Again, sorry, we're still trying to work our way back here, getting the flow. Biggest training camp storyline you are watching is for quiet competency. All right. Yep. No distractions, no chaos.
You know, no headlines that don't need to be out there.
Be as boring as you possibly can. Please, even though that would, in terms of interest for us, not be great, but do yourself a favor. Please just be as boring as you can in training camp. I will say the rookie development is the biggest thing I'm watching, and training camp, darling, who will captivate the hearts of fans during this 3-week, basically month endeavor of training camp. I'll go Emil Ekiyor. George, he will go. See, I already forgot. I'm so sorry. Evan Hall. Holy cow. This is a perfect time to get out of the pod. My brain has stopped working. That's it. It's 1 hour, and all of a sudden now it shuts off. That's what happens when you take a 2-week break and just not use your brain whatsoever.
That's the thing. I mean, vacation is for you, it's fresh. I had a week since I've been back from vacation. You know, you're still back into like work mode now. That's hard to do.
This is training camp for us. The Colts have a month of training camp. This pod right here was our training camp. And as a reminder, as we do finish up here, in case you missed it on our previous pods, very excited for our training camp coverage. We will be live, or we're recording pods, I guess you should say. I'm sure sometimes we'll be live as well, depending on the big news. But at least we will be recording pods daily. Every single training camp practice that happens, we will be reacting to it. How does Richardson look? How are the wide receivers developing? Who is standing out at defensive back? How is Shane Steichen coaching this damn team? Is the offensive line actually looking any sort of better than last year? Every single question you have throughout the entirety of training camp, we will be talking about and discussing and hopefully getting answers to as well. So if you haven't, make sure you download and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Blue Horseshoe Podcast, and on YouTube, check us out, Blue Horseshoe Pod on the tube. You can look at George and I's now tan faces every single episode, every single day. So we'll have a daily podcast, quick 15, 20, 25 minutes reacting to the biggest news from that training camp session, from that training camp practice. So again, there's going to be a lot of content coming at you. So make sure now, if you haven't before, don't know what you're waiting for, but it's not too late. Download, subscribe, wherever you get your pods, and on YouTube, the Blue Horseshoe Podcast. We got a lot of work coming at you this next month and heading into the season as well. So, George, hopefully we are both rested and ready to go here for a very, very busy and exciting, intriguing first training camp with Shane Steichen and Anthony Richardson. But that hopefully serves as a good primer for you to get ready. And we are set now to be coming at you daily starting next week. So, George, it's officially football season.
Summer is over.
Summer is over. Just like that. Just when you thought it just started, it is over. All right. We will be back next Tuesday. Chris Ballard, players are going to start to report, and we kind of get set for training camp here. So we'll be back next Tuesday, kind of get you kicked off here and ready to go for Colts training camp 2023. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next week right here on the Blue Horseshoe Pod.